All right, I'm going to go ahead and record and let everyone in.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Almost good afternoon. How's everyone? Hey, Ethan. Fancy seeing you here.
Yeah, I never come to these things, so I thought I'd check one out.
Finally, I was wondering where you were. Hey, Scott. You're on mute. Aw. Just gonna give it a couple more minutes, guys. Not even, to just let everyone in. It's good seeing. I see a lot of people have videos on today. This is awesome. Hey, Tony. Are you blonde now, or is it pink?
Oh, that's pink.
Oh, I like it. It's like Easter pink. Pretty.
Thanks.
All right, guys. I think we're good. Welcome, everyone, to Emerging Styles. Oh, one more. Welcome. Who's talking? All right, I think we're good. Okay, one more time. Welcome, everyone, to Emerging Styles. Kveik, Seltzer and Oenobeers. We're excited to have Chris Gerling here from AgriTech from Cornell. Chris, how are you doing?
Good.
Good, thank you. Before we begin, I just want to touch on a couple things. First, I'd like to say thank you to our Friday presenting sponsor, Yakima Chief Hops, and Friday session sponsors, Fraunhofer Design, Surpass Chemical Company, and Deschutes Technologies. Thank you guys so much for all your help. I'm going to be posting things in chat. Please let me know if you missed anything. And if you guys wouldn't mind just keeping yourselves on mute unless called upon for a question. If you do have a question, go ahead and put it in chat or just use the raise your hand function. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Jen. Are you going to monitor the chat? And
I am.
Good questions. Yep. Okay, so you'll tell me when there's questions and everything like that, because yeah.
You got it.
All right, because once I share my screen, it gets harder to see that. So yes. All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you all today on this sunny day where I am in Geneva. Hope it is where you all are as well. You look like a very formal group, I can tell. So no, it sounds like it could be fun. So I'm a wine guy. Wine and cider is my background. So it's always fun to cross silos and go into the different beverage groups. I think that there's a lot to be learned. The more that I work across beverages, the more that I learn about not only those beverages, but going back to what I can do with where I came from. So I hope that we can have some good cross-pollination talks today. Forgive me if I use any terms incorrectly. I do know some brewing, basic brewing, but I'm far from you all are much more experienced and literate in that side of things. So with that, let me get my screen shared here, and we will start talking about some new and emerging styles of for the beer industry, or some crossovers and things like that. So here's the title. You all saw that already. So away we go. Kveik, Gesundheit. So this is a something that has come from Norway, Scandinavia. It came to everybody's attention, I think, from the Lars blog. Lars Gorshall is a amazing person who is into a lot of things, is a polymath, and one of his interests is beer. We pronounce it, Kveik, sorta. It helps to be of Scandinavian descent to really get it right, but that's the way we're going to do it today. What is it? It's a dialect word for yeast, right? And we're talking about traditional farmhouse yeast that have been passed down back when people were subsistence farmers, back when you had everything you needed and you made everything you needed. Generally, you weren't buying things at stores, you were producing what you needed. And so these were yeast cultures that were saved, and they were used for bread. and for beer and for any other uses that we might have for yeast. And they were often saved on sticks or on logs or in jars or wherever people had. You can see this is a Kveik stock or Kveik stalker. They call these logs, these sticks, and then they're dried on these apparatus. Had good surface area, and then they might be dipped into the wort next year or whenever the next time is made. And so one thing that I'll thank him later, but Lance Shaner from Omega Yeast, who was a big U.S. advocate and importer of this style and of these strains to the U.S., is a big advocate for saying it's not a style of beer, right? It's a yeast. So his thing is, you wouldn't say it's a yeast beer, right? If someone asks you what kind of beer is it, you wouldn't say yeast beer. So you wouldn't say it's a Kveik beer necessarily either. We're talking about the yeast. We're not talking about the beer in particular, and we'll talk more about that. It's farmhouse. It has this farmhouse heritage, but it's not the same way that we think about traditional farmhouse products. I think when I think of a farmhouse beer, farmhouse cider, something like that, we're usually thinking of something that's going to be rustic, maybe funky a little bit, maybe hazy, all these kind of things. These yeast strains are actually just like everything else or many other things in Scandinavia. They are efficient, they are clean, they are prescribed, so they are not usually adding the kinds of characters you might assume when you hear farmhouse. They are generally relatively neutral, all things considered. And going further, some of the things that we think about when we think about these cultures is that they are high temperature tolerant. They ferment at very high temperatures. Some of these Norwegian places, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 105, even 110. And they're tolerant of pretty wide alcohol ranges. So that makes them suitable for a lot of different styles, especially like a barley wine or something like that, where we're talking about a lot of alcohol. So they're quick. Generally, they're fast, high temperature, high alcohol tolerance. And so they are, these are the hallmarks of these strains. The phenolic off flavor, so going back to that farmhouse style, Belgian saison kind of thing. It generally not those phenolics, the 4-ethylguaiacol, 4-vinyl phenol, those clovey, some people say horsey, some Brettanomyces kind of characters. We don't find those generally with these Kveik strains in cultures. They do produce some fruity esters, like that we might think of more in maybe like a wine kind of context. But so they can have some fruitiness, but they generally are not those intense farm kind of characters that we might associate with some other farmhouse styles. And so that makes these strains more likely to be used in other styles of beer where you're not looking to, we still want to show that it's an IPA. You still want to show that it's an ale. So yeah, so when we could use it, you could use it for any time you might use like an English ale yeast. So for IPAs, for pale ales, but also for stouts, for porters, there's lots of different possibilities for when you could use these strains. Anything that you're going to have high alcohol, where you're going to need, or intense kind of conditions. When time is of the essence, they tend to be pretty fast. So if you've got a growing facility and you need to turn over tanks relatively quickly, these seem to be a good choice. And also, if you're not able to cool or not able to cool efficiently, if it's summer, if your cooling system is down, if you don't have a cooling system yet, there's a lot of possibilities for these strains as well. Lance mentioned he's excited for these for home brewers because they seem relatively bulletproof, and for people who might not have controls. So that's a good option. And but I think that it seems like there's a lot of a lot of possibilities. And so I expect to see these or hear about these. It's not something you're necessarily going to put on your label, on your can, but it's a tool I think that brewers can use, and certainly no reason why New York brewers wouldn't benefit from trials with these kinds of strains. And if you want the real nitty gritty, I suggest you get in touch with Lance Shaner at Omega. There's other yeast production places who have these now, but I know that he's really good at responding and answering emails.
Hey, Chris,
yeah.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
For anybody interested, at 2:30 today, we have a session with Lance, Modern Approach to Microbiology. So if anybody has any questions about this type of yeast, I hope you hop on and you'll be able to ask them. I noticed a lot of people have used this yeast in chat, and I'm just curious if anybody wouldn't mind chiming in. What are some of the pitfalls that you might have experienced with using this yeast, and have you found it to really work with a specific style the best? Go ahead, Bill.
Hey, how's it going? Billy from Heritage Hill here. So I've been using Kveik, however you want to say it, for probably a year and a half now commercially. I started off just pilot batching home brews with it, experimenting with it because at first it kind of seemed insane to ferment that hot, and I didn't want to just throw a lot of beer at it. So basically, I don't push my beers any quicker than I would that of an English strain, but I take advantage of the fact that it's a very clean fermentation with no diacetyl, little to no diacetyl. I still would suggest doing do a diacetyl test. But I mean, I'm not pushing beers out in 4 days. It still takes me 13 days grain to glass, but you have a super clean, very, whatever you want to complement in that beer is what's going to stand out. So, I've used it in sour beer. I've used it in, stouts, IPAs, and I actually have a few different yeasts that I use for different things. And what I've found in my trials and tribulations is different fermentation temperatures with Kveik actually produces different characteristics. So the hotter you ferment it, you get a lot more of those fruit forward kind of accents on the hop characteristics versus and that's upwards of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Versus I've fermented in the low 70s, and you get a lot more neutral. So that would, more neutral is better for an English style, stout or something of that nature. And basically, that's the upside of it. The downside being, you can't really produce phenols out of it, but knowing that it's a clean yeast, people should know that, I guess. I'm in a lot of Kveik forums and stuff because we're really on the forefront of everything. So it's kind of often asked, like, how do I make a saison with this, or how do I make a Hefeweizen with this? And it's like you don't, you take advantage of the clean matter of it and use it how you may. But I've brewed 15, 20 different styles with it, all various results depending on if it's, malt forward, hop forward, a fruited sour beer, but, various temperatures and ingredients. It's a really nice utility to put in your wheelhouse because, you can do so much with it. And I've been able to reharvest and repitch a lot with it. I usually underpitch severely, and I actually grow half in a brink. And then I will, I've gotten almost 20 generations off one lab pitch that was actually half the pitch rate of a normal size brew day for me. So huge advocate for it. Awesome stuff. Thank you to Tim from Barrett Acorn for putting me onto it. He's been a pioneer in it for a while. And, I was skeptical at first and threw a couple 5-10 gallon batches at it. And now I have 3 different strains that I mess with and keep pushing around. So
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that.
yeah, cheers.
Thanks, Bill. And as he said, right, it's a tool. So there's things that it does really well, and there are some things you're not going to get. Like, so if you do want the farmhouse, then it's not your best choice. Yeah, so there's a lot of possibilities there. And yeah, as I think, as he's pointed out, different temperatures, you don't have to do it hot, and different temperatures can give you different results. And that's a fun option to have. So yeah, with that, I think we'll go on to the next style, unless we'll go on to, yeah. All right. Okay. Oenobeer. It's perhaps the descendant of these Italian grape ales. And so it was brought over. Alex Liberati at Liberati Denver, I think, is the primary evangelist of this. You can pronounce it, once again, it's open to different pronunciation things. I say Oenobeer because he's talking about, it's the diphthong. The OE is, we say enology. That's what I call myself sometimes, an enologist. But you can also pronounce that diphthong a little differently if you want. But yeah, and yeah, that's the what we're talking about here. And we're talking about using grapes and or juice and or wine to blend into beer. And so the beer judges have a definition for what Italian grape ales are, and I love the fact that they're sometimes refreshing, they're sometimes more complex, they all characterized by different varieties of grapes. They say grapes up to 40%, and the grape must can be used at different stages, at the boil, primary, secondary fermentation, or even at aging. So there's a lot of leeway there. They do have some general guidelines for what they put for appropriate IBUs, appropriate ABV, appropriate different things like that. But before we get too far with that, I'm going to go to Alex's definition because I think it's a fun comparison. He says very specifically, beer, not ale, because he doesn't think that ale is the only option you have for blending. What about a porter? What about all these different things? What about all these different beer styles could potentially benefit from this kind of a collaboration? So he doesn't want to just limit it to ale. And he says that, according to TTB, if you want to call it beer, you can go up to 49% of fermentable sugars other than grain. So he doesn't see that 40% limit as being necessarily, he sees that as being somewhat arbitrary. And but he does actually, when some of his interviews talking to him about the actual amounts that he thinks are appropriate, we're talking more like 10% probably. They're not going to do a half and half. But beyond that, he doesn't want limits on IBUs, ABV, color, anything like that, because he thinks this is a very experimental product and a very experimental time. And so don't put any constraints on until people have really sussed it all out, gone different directions, seen what they like, seen what they didn't like, see what works before you start to put these arbitrary limitations and definition on there. So that's his kind of feeling on the subject. So from somebody who deals with wine a lot and has made wine for a long time, some things that I would say: we don't ever boil grape juice before, during, after fermentation. So personally, if you're trying to really express the aromatics, the character that you enjoy in an aromatic wine, for example, we'll talk about what aromatic means a little bit more. I don't think the boil is the best place to do that. That said, going back to Alex, this is an experimental thing. Try it, right? When everybody's going one way, somebody always goes the other, and sometimes that's really the way to go. But I don't think that's the best way to get the character that we might be seeking, especially in New York State. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Nitrogen may be limited a little bit, probably not to an extent that it's something you're going to need to worry about, especially if you're using it in the 10% or so range. If you do go up to nearly half grape juice versus a malt base, then we winemakers traditionally do add nitrogen. We'll talk more about that when we get to seltzer, but so that's something to possibly consider. And just the fact that all grapes are not created aromatic. Some grapes are much more neutral in what they contribute to a fermentation than others. And so it comes down to your goals, and we'll talk more about that as well. New York State is a great grape state. We have probably the most grapes used in wine of any place in the world, probably of this size, because it's hard to grow grapes here, and so people have been experimenting for a long time, because people are interested, because we have people doing grape growing on Lake Champlain, in the North Country. We have people on the South Fork of Long Island, otherwise known as the Hamptons. We have people out in Lake Erie who have been growing grapes for juice for years, who are now making wine. So we have quite the selection. And so some of these grapes, I think about Riesling, I think about Gewürztraminer, I think about Sauvignon Blanc, Frontenac Gris, and La Crescent, the new Minnesota varieties. Very, when in a traditional fermentation in a winery, lots and lots of aromas of citrus, of other fruit that can be really fresh and refreshing. Some of these grapes can contribute other characters. Some of these are really good at, are very dark and can give you color if you think that color is something you're after. Some of these grapes can have tannin, right? So that astringency, that drying characteristic that you might like to add to a certain beer style. So there's a lot of different options, and so it helps to know what you're after, I think. Once again, you can always just experiment, but it's good to know, do a little research on these varieties to figure out what am I going to get from these before and after fermentation. And just, just to help think about this, you probably know this already on a certain level, but just think about, it's the fermentation that really makes wine what it is. It's the same thing as it makes beer what it is. You don't drink wort juice very often. You might, some people do, and some people like grape juice, but they're fairly simple. You get a couple of aromatic compounds that volatiles that you appreciate, but when we put the yeast in there and we do the fermentation, kablam, we get all these more interesting volatile compounds, all these more different interesting aromatics. And so something to think about as you're selecting your grape varieties. And so if you ever had like a wine grape to eat, like a Zinfandel grape, a Riesling grape, a Sauvignon Blanc grape, they're pretty boring, actually. They're a little bit grassy, a little bit sweet, sour, but there's not much to them. It's the fermentation that gives you that amazing, all those amazing aromas. Zinfandel, it could be, black pepper, could be green pepper in some of the Bordeaux varieties, or the passion fruit. You get the boxwood you get with Sauvignon Blanc, the grassiness, all that stuff. All those are from precursors that we're not perceiving in the grape. So now Labrusca, Concord grapes, Niagara grapes that are grown in New York State, those are grapey before, during, after, all the time during fermentation. They're a lot in every kind of sense of the word, but it's something that could be distinctly a regional thing that somebody somewhere, I think it's that grapiness that sometimes wine connoisseurs turn their nose up at. It's a unique thing that we have here. There's a little bit grown on the West Coast in Washington State, not a lot, and the rest of the world doesn't really grow these in any quantity. So this is something that you may think, being from around here, is kind of a boring flavor that you may not enjoy, but I think about other markets and other places who don't have this and might like it. Something to think about. One note, as we're thinking about using wine grapes, wine itself, wine barrels for aging. That's one of the things that people talk about. Spirits barrels. If we get spirits barrels, if you get whiskey barrels, if you get those kind of barrels, sherry, things like that, those are going to be clean. Those have just had spirit in them. They've just had high alcohol in them. They haven't had any sugar in them, really. They haven't had any contaminants, is what I'm talking about. So those are almost always not, we don't have to worry about any kind of potential spoilage organisms taking up residence in there. Whereas in wine barrels, we certainly do. Sometimes there can be Brettanomyces, there can be all sorts of other bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, all sorts of things going on in those barrels, depending on how they've been used and how well they've been cleaned and how they've been stored. And so that's something to be aware of. Maybe you're after that, that you can never, this day and age, people, all different styles, something like that. But it's just something to consider when if you're picking up used wine barrels, that they may be adding things beyond just that, the toasty character, the vanilla character, some of the wine character. There may be microbes coming along, and they may be adding things that you might or might not appreciate. So that's just to keep in mind. And what was I going to say about barrels? One more thing about barrels. That'll come to me. Anyway, so I think that there are a lot of possibilities for New York State. We have, in Italy, it was a place that they had lots and lots of grapes, lots of wine culture, not so much beer culture. And so I think some people view the Italian grape, the IGA trend, as something to introduce people who did not necessarily understand beer yet, there's like a gateway to them. In New York, we don't have that problem. We have a great beer culture, but we have this amazing craft beverage culture in general. We have so many distilleries, cideries, wineries, and breweries. People really appreciate all these different craft products. So I think there's really some collaboration, some synergy, possibilities there. And I think that we could make some regionally interesting products. That's in Europe. They're always looking for things that come from a place. And I think that here we have all these grapes, we have all these breweries. I think there's some potentials there. But with that in mind, you should always think about, as I said, there's lots of different grapes that have lots of different chemistry, lots of different characteristics. And so make sure that you are selecting some for the characteristics that you're after in your product, that you think will complement your product. Yeah, and while I have my ideas about how wine is made to best express certain characteristics, you can certainly disregard those and try going in the opposite direction and seeing what kind of product that yields. This is a lot of comments. I don't know if there's questions too.
Yeah, there is a lot of chat going back and forth about how, where to get, grape juice and barrels and stuff like that. Do you have any recommendations for the brewers?
Yeah. So some breweries, some wineries just sell juices of, so I think about like Fulkerson Winery on Seneca Lake. They do quite a trade for home winemakers. And so they can, if you need 10, 50 gallons of a certain grape juice in particular, you can source. I'm sure that's a place that you could just go, to them as a regular customer. Most other wineries, depending on the volumes you need, it's usually not that hard to just call them up and say, I need X amount of this. There are boards that list stuff for sale, but that's usually in quantities greater than I think that most people here would probably want. You're probably not looking for 10 tons of Chardonnay. You're probably not looking for, and I think if it was me, I would always want juice already pressed. Grapes are sticky, they are messy, the seeds and the pulp and the skins are just a huge hassle. And if you don't have a dedicated facility for dealing with that, once you're going to make more than like 5 gallons worth, it's better to have somebody else deal with that nonsense and just get the juice. So yeah, a place like Fulkerson, Fallbright on Keuka Lake, is a place that I'm not sure if they're still going, but they're doing a lot of trade. Places that that sell those kind of supplies. It's home winemaking, but they are. I'm sure they could get you greater quantities of those kinds of products.
Can I ask the participants a question real quick, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. So with this style of beer, if anybody can talk about how they're making it, are you making like a base beer and then taking it to the fermenter and adding wine juice then, or do you generally just put beer in barrels with the grape juice? And just out of curiosity, has anybody tried making this style of beer in a cool ship with wine juice as well? It's a lot of questions. I don't know if anyone can answer any of them. No? Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I would add into the fermenter if it was me. But once again, that's not the only way to do it, or necessarily the right way to do it. That's what I think would be the most straightforward way to do. But yeah, people are welcome to experiment with other options. I guess one thing I was going to say about barrels is that the other thing about whiskey barrels, or about most spirits barrels, is they're made from American oak, and they cost the distiller a couple $100. I guess it's gotten more expensive lately, but wineries sometimes buy French oak barrels for like $1,300, and then are hoping to get that back from somebody else who they can talk into buying them. So just be aware that there's some used barrels, they may quote you outrageous prices, and I would never pay those for used barrels. But on the other hand, be suspicious of ones that they want to get rid of really cheap, because those might be the ones that are infected and that they're trying to unload. So anyway, yeah, that's with the barrel work. For people who barrels are kind of a nightmare because of their cost, because they're delicate, because you can't put in a spray ball and do a caustic wash into an oak barrel. You'll destroy the barrel. So like you're very limited in how you can clean them. It often requires specialized equipment. There are special spray things to get in there, but they're very heavy. They tend to spring leaks. There are certain bugs that drill through them and cause holes. So having a barrel program is something that winemakers find an obligation often. In breweries, in other places, it can be a little bit fun, but just be aware that there is some baggage that comes with dealing with barrels. You could keep thinking about, if you have more questions about wine, and if you do want to want a certain amount of a certain kind of grape, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to put you in touch with the wineries who might be growing that, or a grower who's growing that. And then, yeah, there is a cooperative extension does have a list of where marketing for people are selling bulk wine or looking for all that kind of stuff. So it does exist. It's almost always full of crazy spam. We try to change the filters all the time, but inevitably you're going to get 72 offers to work from home and one thing about Cabernet, but it's there. All right. So I guess we can move on now to seltzer. I will try not to be too glib here because it invites the jokes, but most of them I think are on this slide. So seltzer is an American invention. As far as we know, of the last couple of years. It's something that is relatively new, but also has been happening for a few years now. And it's interesting to see how the pandemic has kind of frozen, right? I think it seems like where seltzer was in the end of 2019 is kind of where it was in the end of 2020, because everything kind of stood still, I think, in some of those trends. The people who developed it said that they saw people ordering vodka tonics. They saw people really interested in these low calorie flavored sparkling water. And so they started to think, how can we capitalize on this? It's technically a flavored malt beverage, and generally in the eyes of the government, but there may be no malt because it often has a sugar base, and it's fermented and not distilled. And the reason that it's fermented and not distilled is because of taxes, right? Because the estimation in New York State is that it would cost like $2 more per 6-pack to cover the taxes if you're using a distilled spirit versus something that you've fermented. So generally, it's based on a fermented base, although that fermented base is as neutral as possible, right? Seltzer is kind of more known for what it's not than what it is, right? That's what this is, space, right? We don't want carbs. We don't want sugar. We don't want gluten. We don't want artificial colors or flavors. We don't want high fructose corn syrup. So seltzer is not any of these generally, although there may be some high fructose corn syrup going into some of those products now. But generally, it's the lesser of all of these, whatever you want to call them, that dietary no-nos right now, and that's how it fits very well into these, the lack of all these things that people are trying to avoid. How is it made? Generally, you've got a fermented sugar base or a very neutral malt base. And it can be just cane sugar. It can be sugar from corn. It can be sugar from beets. It can just be cane sugar. And then we add our water. Sweeteners, very little. Usually there's 1 or 2 grams of sugar at the most in a lot of these, although, in the big brands at least, or they're using the non-caloric sweeteners now. They might be doing some stevia thing or some monk fruit thing or something like that. And then there's natural flavors. That's our, and that's a flavor you bought from a flavor house. Generally, it's something that comes from a lab, not from the fruit tree next door, and you dose in to get to wherever you want to be. And usually 100 calories or less is the threshold. Now, when I was young and naive, I was setting up for a distilling workshop, and we didn't have anything on hand to distill. And we're like, well, we'll just ferment some sugar. What could be harder than, what could be easier than that, right? And you just dump in some sugar and some water and stir it up, throw in some yeast, and away you go. Well, sugar is not that easy to ferment, it turns out, because, and we found that out, sugar has nothing, right? You've got your nice malt base generally. It gives you all these nutrients, especially the nitrogen and other, micronutrients and everything like that the yeast need. Sugar has little or none of these basically. So you're going to have to supplement with yeast similar to nitrogen. And you may have to buffer the pH. That's another thing we found out, is sometimes when you've just got that, the pH is basically 7-ish or whatever, that the yeast, there's no buffering, right? There's no capacity to hold on when the yeast start to respire and start to make compounds and change the environment. There's nothing to stop them from sending the pH rocketing one way or another. And so that can be hard on them. And so having things to buffer that become necessary sometimes. And just, so you're all, if you're a licensed operator, you've already dealt with the vagaries of federal regulations and how, according to the federal government, it's this, or the state government, it's that. And according to, you have to submit, like for all these, you have to submit a formula to the TTB, but that doesn't mean you have to submit a COLA to the TTB. If you're using a sugar base, then that falls under FDA purview. And so they handle all the labeling and the package requirements, everything like that. And sometimes there are different state things as well. I guess in like Oregon, a sugar-based seltzer is a wine. And so you have to have a winery license to make things like that. But in New York, that's not the case. So yeah, so sugar has its own complications, I guess, when you're going to use it. But the upside is, of course, that it's very, very neutral. And while those of us in the craft beverage industry have spent years trying to make flavorful products from natural ingredients, that turns out that's not what people want anymore. They want a little bit of flavor exactly as much as they want and nothing else, right? And so that's what they get from sugar, potentially. And so just a little bit on yeast assimilable nitrogen. You may already know this, but seeing as usually malt has all the nutrients you need, you may not have to think about it too much. In the world of fruit and sugar, we don't have the nutrients we need necessarily, so we spend a lot of time thinking about yeast assimilable nitrogen. That's what YAN stands for. It's a combination of ammonium ions, that's what we call inorganic nitrogen, versus the organic nitrogen, which is the primary amino nitrogen, the PAN, the FAN, the alpha amino nitrogen, the assimilable amino nitrogen. All these different terms all mean the same thing. Why do we go through all this nonsense? It's mostly because there are a couple amino acids that yeast can't handle, like proline, because of the conformation of it. The molecule is something that yeast can't deal with, so we have to go through all this nonsense and not just say amino acids. But yeah, we've got these couple kinds of nitrogen we can add. Ammonia, inorganic nitrogen, is cheap generally. Yeast like it. We think of it as kind of junk food for yeast. They consume it really quickly. They might make a lot of heat when they do it. There's always a fear that they'll crash on that. Then the primary amino nitrogen is the salad. It's the vegetables. It's the nutritious, more slowly metabolized part of the nutrient. The yeast nutrient companies would really like you to buy this one, and because it's so much healthier and helps the yeast maintain a steadier state and like that. It also happens to be generally much more expensive than the ammonia, which is generally available pretty cheap in bulk. But anyway, nutrients may be required for a sugar fermentation, and it may be a lot. You may have to go up to 200, 300 parts per million of added nitrogen in these cases. So what do we think about, if vodka seltzer is the ancestor, is the progenitor of these products? I think about vodka because if you look at the standard of identity and the TTB for vodka, it's a distilled beverage up to 95% ethanol with no discernible character or flavor. Okay, so vodka is essentially nothing. So what does that have to do with this? How are you going to sell vodka in the world today? Two things: have incredible marketing, right? Absolute or Tito's, very expensive. Or you're going to make your vodka, maybe if you're on a small scale and you don't have millions to market it, you're going to make a product that isn't quite so nothing, right? That tastes like something, that has a little bit of, more character to tell you apart. And so that's why am I talking about that? Because when we think about seltzers, if you are making a product that is sugar, natural flavors, fermented sugar, natural flavors, and carbonation, and is essentially the same as White Claw or Truly, then you're going to have to market with them. And you probably can't if you're watching this webinar. I'm sorry to tell you. Maybe you can. If you can, I need some grants. But no. No. So in the craft space, your options are, probably not to try to make the same product as them and try to compete with them, but to make something that means a little bit something more to you or to your customers, so that comes from some place that has an identity that works with you. So how it fits with a New York craft brewer, is you're probably not going to want to do something that's just pure sugar. You're going to maybe want it to have a base of a product that came from New York, right? And then you can say, this is not cane sugar that we got on the international market. This is from a New York grain that we know the farmer who grew it, that kind of thing. And yes, it's not super neutral. It has a taste, it has a flavor, it has a character because it's real, because it's authentic. And so, there are some people who are doing this already. Many of you may be doing this already. And there's a lot of approaches, but like the 1911 cider, that actually has an apple base to it, right? And so I think that's, if you're going to do this as a craft producer, you're going to have to make something that means something to you because of who you are, because of the ingredients that you use, because of what your brand means, because of what you're trying to sell to your customer. And so it's not going to be just a pale imitation of White Claw, which is a pale enough thing already, right? So that's kind of my thinking on the subject, at least. So with that, I think I'm just about out of things oh yeah, well, let's talk about the future. So what am I seeing? What gets sent to our lab right now? People are getting over the whole tax implications of including spirits and are wanting to make the full-on, let's not make a imitation of a cocktail. Let's put the whole cocktail in the can and sell it. That's what we're seeing a lot of right now. People contact me. We're going to make a Bloody Mary that's already mixed, put in the can, sell it. We're going to make X or Y gin and tonics. We want the gin and tonic already mixed, ready to go. And they're not, those people I think are less concerned about like sugar and carbs. I think they're more thinking this is convenient. This is the whole, everything you need, away you go. And then they're on the other side of the spectrum. There's people who, we actually want to use fruit juice. We don't want to use flavors. We actually want to use, organic, whatever, lime or, the whole thing. We want to, so that's what we're seeing. We don't just want to use the natural flavors. We want to use the actual products. And that has its own headaches when it comes to hazes, when it comes to colors, when it comes to those kind of stability, but that's what people are trying to do right now. They're trying to solve those problems. And then I think you're seeing already that people, for a while, I think seltzers were all about summer refreshment, beach, deck, all that kind of stuff. And now they're saying, I had somebody approach us and say, well, what happens if you're at a ski lodge and you need, what's your occasion? So can you have a, I think people are starting to look at seasonal varieties of those. So that's what we're seeing coming up next. Definitely the top one, the canned cocktails, I think is what you're going to see on the horizon. I think a lot of this is being pushed by the fact that everything is off premise right now, right? So it's all about something that you can kind of do quickly, easily, conveniently. When people can go back to bars and back to restaurants, we'll see if they want different things. So yeah, I don't know if people have, Jen, if you want to frame the questions or.
We do have a couple questions. First, Tony had a question. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as buffering seltzer, do you just use a highly alkaline water? You just add salts?
Yeah, you can, there's a few things you can do. There's some blends of things you can add with like some carbonates or things like that where, water alone is probably not going to do it. So you may need to add just some salts or something like that. And there's some options out there. And some people don't seem to be able to get by without doing that, so long as they keep the nutrients flowing and they're just doing a lot of mixing and monitoring everything. It's not essential, but it's something that you might want to think about if it seems like the pH is really like spiking on you. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And Billy had a question for you. Billy, go ahead.
So I apologize if I missed you talking about water profile. I'm in the middle of heating up to a boil. But in terms of water profile, I've read on the internet, and I know this is probably more a question for Kevin Williams at Willow Rock because he's making some awesome seltzy boys right now. But I've read on the internet that RO water or distilled water is the best profile to use because too much minerality creates almost like a white wine kind of note to your seltzer. Do you have anything to say on that matter? Because I'm about to make my first couple, and I didn't really know the approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you use like RO water or distilled water, you're really gonna have to add more back to make sure that you can, because that's now you've got really nothing going on there besides the sugar, and so you may have to add something back in terms of just to make sure that you're that the fermentation is going to work and the yeast can go in that. I can't speak to the whiny character that people report from certain water profiles with that, but I just would be concerned about fermentations sticking. I'd be concerned about yeast stress, and so yeah, I would ask what he is using, what he's adding, if it's just nutrients or if there's other things, because RO water, we don't like to rehydrate yeast in RO water or distilled water because there's just nothing going on, and so I would want to address it some way or another, I think, if I was going to use that. So yeah.
Awesome. Kevin, can you touch? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I saw Billy's comment. We actually haven't really been playing with the water profile on our seltzers at all. We've been going from our hot liquor tank right into it. So we let the chlorine kind of evaporate out within the hot liquor tank and then go from there. We haven't really been playing with that water profile. So we've kind of just been using our water locally.
We do have a longer maturation.
We do have a longer maturation process. What?
And I would assume, Kevin, that your flavors just overwhelm anything that you get from water. Probably, is that fair?
Yes, perhaps.
Yeah,
they're pretty flavored. It's a sugar base we're using.
Yeah, our goal was to bring something
Filter.
We can't hear him.
Sorry, yeah.
He's right behind. He's off to the side. He's coming in now.
Yeah, so we had originally tested like charcoal filtration and stuff like that, but it just wasn't going to work at scale. But we found that with just a couple extra days to a week of kind of post-fermentation lagering time, we were able to clean up our base pretty easily to where flavors weren't detectable hardly at all.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the flavorings and stuff like that help to mask anything that might be there, as well as like a good carbonation level, which then adds challenges to packaging, especially if you're going to get into canning. But like, no, we're not pasteurizing, right? No, we're not pasteurizing, to John Anthony.
You don't pasteurize. Do you have any residual sugar?
No, the yeast ferments it right out.
Okay, and you don't back sweeten or anything like that.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So just everyone knows they can do that, but if you do back sweeten with fermentable sugar or whatever, you're going to have to filter or pasteurize or both, because you're going to risk your turning can bombs. So yes, yeah. Thanks, guys. That's helpful. Yeah.
Kevin, what yeast are you pitching for your seltzer, and also what attenuation numbers do you see with obviously simple sugars? You're going to see different attenuation levels than what you'd see of beer.
Sure.
Let Rocky jump in.
I use a blend of a nutrient and champagne yeast blend with a sterile addition, and then we stagger additional nutrient additions over the first few days to kind of get through the lag phase and into fermentation. Attenuation, all of it, like yes, attenuation.
Sweet.
Realistically, I'm joking, but like realistically, like plus 90%. Like it's
the beauty of sugar. Yeah.
We're not fermenting for residual anything. So.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Bill. Did you have any more questions?
No, I was just thanking the lads over at Willow Rock.
Does anybody have any last minute questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you do. If anybody is making any of the beers we talked about and they currently have anything on draft, or not draft, but bottled, canned, can you let me know in chat? Because I'm really curious to try some of these styles. And then Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to say? Or you good? I saw it highlight on you.
Slide there about the ready to drink canned cocktails. I was just wondering if you saw any kind of cocktail combinations that stood out as particularly memorable or particularly disastrous. Inspiration.
Oh, for the most part, I should say that we haven't done a lot of tasting of them. They've mostly just been people's concepts, and they're just talking to us about, are we going to have to pasteurize this? How are we going to, stabilize that? What are we going to do about this and stuff? So a lot of them are still in the formulation phase. I think that things like a gin and tonic is obviously a lot easier to manage than like a Bloody Mary, because now you got to figure out color, and you got to figure out sediment, and you got to figure out all those kind of things and how it's going to live and breathe in a can. So, not really yet, I guess, is the answer. I think we'll have to see how those come out. I've tried a few on the market, and it's fine. They're not what you can get from a bartender, across, and it's once again, it's a convenience thing. It's it's the sadness of right now. I can go home and drink these in my house without having to, do anything, but I hope that people seek out the real thing when that becomes an option again. So, maybe someone will crack it. Beer is the only thing that is really good in a can. Wine, I have yet to be blown away by any wine I've found in a can. Cider does not get better in cans. The cocktails, things, you can make really good beer and put it in cans and still be good, but a lot of other products don't like cans that much. It changes too many things about them. So, yeah.
I wish you would tell the other industries that so we'd have more cans.
Well, right. We're running out. Yeah, because everybody else is stealing your cans right now. I know. The cider people cannot can things fast enough. And we have so many problems with cider in cans. It's yeah. So anyway, so yeah.
Ethan, what were you saying?
Oh, dude, I was just wholeheartedly agreeing, man. I want my cans back.
Awesome. Well, if there isn't any last minute questions.
Yeah, I have one real quick, actually.
Okay, go ahead, Tony.
Have you ever noticed any reductive qualities in beers that were co-fermented with grape juice?
Yeah. So that's a concern that we can have with wine in general, can have that, and then and mixed with beer, that's something we can run into. I think that's something that's best fixed with time. Usually it'll work itself out. But that's one reason to maybe look at your nutrients, about supplementing with some nutrients if you are going to use significant amounts of wine, and air during the fermentation. You guys know all about air and oxygenating fermentations. Sometimes wine people don't want to. But so, yeah, and then, right. So I think air and time are okay, and maybe your nutrients, if that's your case. And there's some varieties and some yeast strains that are going to be more prone to that. That's the other thing, is you have yeast strain choices that are not, that require less nutrients or are less likely to kick out like H2S or anything like that. So.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions. Kevin, go ahead.
I just typed them out. So what are the problems with cider in cans? Is it to do with acidity, perhaps? And also, what do you mean by reductive?
Good questions. So cider in cans, we are worried about reductive smells, actually. We're worried about, and what we call reductive is usually sulfur-like off aromas. Hydrogen sulfides, mercaptans, methyl mercaptan, ethyl mercaptans, disulfides, all that kind of stuff. Sulfur problems are what we call reductive. Even though it's not technically the right word. We should just say sulfur. And usually it's the acidity, and then SO2, the sulfites that are used as a preservative, can get right through the can liner sometimes and react directly with the aluminum. And that creates lots and lots of H2S. So that's what we're worried about with the canned cider most often. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then you had a question from Adam. Adam, go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering, with these Keurig yeast running at 100 degrees and they're taking off in fermentation so rapidly, do they generate an awful lot of more excess heat, and does that put more load on the chillers?
Good question.
I don't know to what extent they're generating more heat. There's already a lot of heat there. I think generally people are not chilling a whole lot when they're using these. I think generally that's kind of part of the advantage of them, is they're not trying to chill much at all. I don't know if Bill is still there and wants to comment on what he's seen. Yeah.
Yeah, so usually I'll knock out around anywhere from 80 degrees Fahrenheit into sometimes 96 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll set my glycol at 102, maybe 104, and I actually just let the beer free rise up that hot and kind of do its thing. I haven't seen any stress on the glycol just because I set it higher than it'll get type deal. I have seen it get up to 104 when I set it that high, so usually I don't push it that hard, but yeah, I haven't seen any more wear and tear than knocking out at 60.
All right, great, thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for attending this session. Thank you so much to all our sponsors. I hope everyone has a great day, and we see you next at accounting with Markham at 1 o'clock. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.